Now, one of the things I really enjoyed about the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian was the way it usually told a good, fun, self-contained story with each and every episode, but also managed to constantly be building to something bigger overall, or something bigger going on in the background that, at times or in an episode here and there, would be brought to the forefront, but without taking away or overshadowing that simple yet good story of Din Djarin and Grogu. And going into this 3rd season, we knew that formula was going to be changing to some extent. Not only were we basically told this by Favreau and Filoni that things were going to get a bit bigger, but it also just seemed obvious or like a natural progression of the story and of the show, with the introduction of things like the Darksaber and characters like Bo-Katan, that we'd be expanding out a bit more, and that, in a sense, The Mandalorian was going to become The Mandalorians. And though I was more than okay with that impending change, over the first 4 episodes of this season, however, that transition ended up feeling a bit clunky. There'd been some pacing issues, entire episodes that, though maybe still good in their own right, didn't exactly feel so much like episodes of The Mandalorian at all, maybe more like episodes of The Doctor, and I'm not talking Doctor Who. Things also felt a bit directionless at times, or maybe like we knew the likely direction. It seemed like the season would be all about restoring Mandalore. They were just taking a roundabout way and detours to get us there, or overtly adding things or entire episodes that we knew or figured that, yeah, they were going to be important for reasons later on, but otherwise felt out of place or in the moment felt kind of unnecessary. And so what this most recent episode mainly felt like to me, well, it felt like by far the best and most enjoyable episode of the season so far, but it felt like them finally getting everything right. It felt like payoff for being patient. Virtually everything from the first 4 episodes just sort of coalesced in this one. And when it ended, you could look back and, for the most part, appreciate that somewhat windy road that got us here. A road that, yeah, maybe could have and should have been a bit straighter, or like there could have been some tighter storytelling here and there to make some of the episodes better in and of themselves. Though that said, I do think, let's call it an unfortunate side effect of the scope and scale of the story growing, is that Din Djarin feels a bit lost in the shuffle right now, especially considering the show used to be almost entirely from his perspective, and be mainly or almost entirely about his adventures with Grogu. Now, for better or worse, he just feels like one of the Mandalorians, and unless a big Uno reverse card is pulled out at some point, Bo-Katan is clearly being set up as the once and future ruler of Mandalore. But I'm once again getting ahead of myself, and so let's go back to the beginning of the episode, where we see that the mossy bearded pirate Gorian Shard has returned to Navarro to get his revenge on High Magistrate Greef Karga for killing some of his men a few episodes back. Not sure exactly what took him so long to seek that vengeance, but he's here now and it's obviously a big problem, so Greef reaches out to the New Republic for help, despite sort of shunning them before. And I gotta say here that Gorian's mouth movements looked a bit puppet-like. I'm not really mad about it or anything. I think the whole design of Gorian is good and interesting in theory, if not extremely well executed. I like the concept of a space pirate looking like he was scraped off the bottom of a real-life pirate ship. But it just felt hard not to notice his mouth, especially the hologram sequence when it really focused in on his face and the mouth movements didn't seem to match the words he was saying at all. However, after that not looking so great, Zeb from Rebels, suddenly, completely out of the blue, showed up and looked absolutely fantastic. This is probably the best animation to live action transfer we've seen so far. He was certainly much better than the low effort live action Grand Inquisitor. I still don't know why they just slapped some white paint on his face and called it a day when that species, the Pa'un, looked so damn cool in live action back in Revenge of the Sith. Anyway, Zeb looking awesome was a very welcome surprise, and I do wonder what exactly he's up to or doing here. Why is he seemingly a pilot with the New Republic? When last we saw him, he was ready to spend some quality time with Kallus on Lyrisan. I'm guessing Hera may have asked him to serve again. As we see in this episode, the New Republic is stretched very thin. Whatever the case may be, I'm assuming we'll have that question potentially answered in the Ahsoka series, where we'll likely see a lot more of Zeb. Maybe we'll even learn what Kallus is up to, if not see him in live action too. Oh, and I also appreciated that Dave Filoni's character, Trapper Wolf, was sitting at the bar with his hat on, of course, during the scene. And he was there alongside Deborah Chow and Rick Famuyiwa, who are also, of course, characters in the show, as well as working behind the scenes. I thought it was just a cool little touch worth mentioning. Anyway, Captain Teva gets this message from Greef Karga asking for help, and after realizing any request he transmits to the New Republic is likely just going to be ignored, they're just too busy, he decides to head to Coruscant to ask face-to-face, but gets turned down. And again here, like in that Dr. Pershing episode, we're getting this sort of bad vibe or attitude from the New Republic. Not so much that they don't care at all, but that their priorities are certainly not with the Outer Rim, and that some of their practices might not be the best. And Captain Teva strongly suspects that since they are kind of ignoring the Outer Rim, that they're missing something going on out there, that pirate activity and Imperial Remnant activity may be linked somehow, and as he says, by the time they figure it out, it may be too late. And it's interesting to note that in the Aftermath trilogy, there were a couple interlude chapters about pirates sort of organizing out in wild space. They even managed to capture an Imperial Super Star Destroyer. Now I'm not sure if that's going to be in any way connected to or relevant to what's going on in The Mandalorian, but it is something to mention and keep in mind. Either way, while Captain Teva is on Coruscant speaking to a colonel played by Tim Meadows, he also runs into and butts heads a bit with Aaliyah Kane from that Pershing episode. She was, of course, the one who kind of mind-flayed the Doctor, and it doesn't seem like she faced any repercussions or was caught for doing that, because here she is working in this colonel's office and getting to overhear sensitive information, and she very much looks interested in what Teva is talking about with what's going on in the Outer Rim with these pirates and everything. And my guess is she's still very much working for Moff Gideon, who, at the end of the episode, we learn has either escaped or been taken prisoner by somebody else. We'll get to that in a bit. Either way, again, with this attitude we're seeing out of them and what's going on with the amnesty program, it seems like the show is kind of laying some foundation for what will go wrong with the New Republic, why they will fail so mightily against the First Order. And don't get me wrong, that does make some sense that it would be hard to kind of pick up the pieces after the Empire. It's not like flipping a switch and magically everything goes back to the way it should be or before the Empire. Not that everything was peachy before the Empire, we also know that. That said, it is kind of sad to see that the efforts of our heroes in the original trilogy and in other stories of that time period have led to this, to a government destined to fail epically. Next up then, thanks to R5 and his time with the Rebellion, Teva is able to locate the Mandalorians. I'm not sure how or why Teva knew to contact and ask R5 if he just so happens to be with them, or if for some reason at some point R5 sent him a message that told him he was with Mandalorians. Whatever the case may be with that, it leads to Teva basically calling in a favor with Din Djarin to go and help against the pirates on Navarro. Not that Din isn't already friends with Greef Karga and wouldn't have just gone and helped him anyway if he knew it was happening. He then asks if the other Mandalorians will come and help him, and we get this pretty epic speech from Paz Vizsla, who I am liking more and more this season. And he basically says, we have no reason to help on Navarro, we've fought against them before, but we're going to help anyway because we're Mandalorians and we don't need a reason to go and fight, which, yeah, I buy that. It sounds Mandalorian to me, plus a little bromance is kind of forming between Paz and Din, and he wants to help his friend's friend. And he also sees this as a chance at a new home on Navarro, you know, a planet with less giant monsters that keep wanting to eat you, and a chance at a brighter future for them in general. We then see Bo-Katan step up to plan and lead the attack to free Navarro from the pirates, and what follows is a good, action-packed sequence. Both the air and land battles were well done and very entertaining. Not much more to say about it other than that. Oh, and that it was a successful attack by the Mandalorians, that they were able to fairly easily defeat the pirates and destroy Gorian's ship and seemingly Gorian himself along with it. Though also worth quickly noting is how badass the armorer continues to be every time she's in combat. I would really love to get her full story someday. Afterwards, a relieved and happy Greef Karga welcomes the Mandalorians to Navarro, and the armorer wants to talk to Bo-Katan, which is when things get really interesting. Starting with the armorer commanding her to remove her helmet, which does catch Bo by surprise, and there's a bit of reluctance. She's got to be wondering if this is some kind of test or a trick or whatever. But it isn't. Instead, the armorer has come to realize that for the good of Mandalore, a new leader is needed to bring all the scattered tribes together, and that leader is the one who has actually seen a mythosaur, which she, the armorer, thought was indeed only a myth or story, and not something actually real. Stories she probably heard when she herself seemingly lived on Mandalore at some point, maybe when she was younger and training to be an armorer. All we know is she has been to the Great Forge at some point on Mandalore. How long she was there, when she was there, did she get trained there? All of those, again, are great questions that I hope someday we learn. Once more, would love to know the armorer's story. That said, I just almost expected her, the armorer, to remove her helmet and to reveal she was somebody either we, the audience, already know, or that Bo-Katan herself knows, or maybe that we both know, which I suppose could still be the case, but something tells me her helmet is never going to come off, that her tribe follows the way, and that way is not removing your helmet, and it's just never going to change. However, that doesn't mean there isn't a place for those who do remove their helmets, that for the good of Mandalore, it is in time to again bring all the tribes together, and Bo is, of course, the one who has now walked in both worlds and can potentially do that, or so believes the armorer. And so, like I was saying before, unless we're headed for some big type of twist, and the only twist I could see is something going wrong with Bo-Katan, where she either goes rogue or is killed, and then Din needs to step up and be the hero and the new Mandalore. Anyway, unless there is a big subversion of expectations on the horizon, she is indeed being set up to once again be the ruler of Mandalore. Her stepping up and leading a very successful battle here, I think, is the last bit of convincing the armorer needed after she led a rescue mission to save a foundling last week. I think the armorer now indeed believes that she is the one, that after seeing the mythosaur, she is just destined to bring forth a new age for Mandalore. Though an interesting question is, if other Mandalorians come and start removing their helmets, will that convince these old school Mandalorians to do the same? I mean, sure, they do seem pretty set in their ways, and I loved the way they glared at Bo-Katan through their helmets when she was walking to her ship without her helmet on, which is kind of a problem and a reason why I could see this all changing. It can be a bit rough getting entire scenes of helmeted characters just talking to each other. I mean, don't get me wrong, despite being extremely impractical, especially during, say, family mealtime, I do kind of love this idea or this rule that they follow. But for the sake of the show itself, I do wonder if they'll move away from it, or if only a couple will hold true to it, like, say, the armorer and maybe Paz and maybe even Din. I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that one, but if I was in that covert and others started to show up and take their helmets off, I'd be a little jealous, or I'd probably be tempted to join their tribe. Moving on then, the episode then ends with Captain Teva discovering a derelict Lambda shuttle, the one that was apparently transporting Moff Gideon and never made it. And after investigating the shuttle, he learns there are some dead New Republic troopers or officers on board, but no sign of Moff Gideon. He then discovers some traces of Beskar, which of course points to Mandalorians being the ones who either helped him escape, could be Mandalorians still loyal to the Empire, or they wanted him as their own prisoner, which would also make sense. He was largely responsible for the Night of 1,000 Tears, and I could certainly see some Mandos wanting to capture him and holding a trial and then of course executing him. And I'm pretty sure that while Bo-Katan is out trying to recruit more Mandalorians or to rally them to her cause or to unite the tribes, she will come across whatever Mandalorians have taken Moff Gideon or liberated him. She'll either come across those who have freed him to put him on trial or those who are working with or for him, which would be a little more interesting. So overall here, I thought this was a fantastic episode. It was the first time this season that I felt like an episode got just about everything right. And somehow, despite Din really not being a huge part of it and Grogu being almost entirely absent, it felt like the show of old. This felt like the show from the first 2 seasons that you could tell a fun story in an episode with, but also be a little something more. This one and the new approach just happened to be a lot more something, I would say. This was pretty much exactly what I was expecting episodes this season to be like from the very start, but weren't exactly. Which doesn't mean I didn't enjoy those first 4 episodes, only that, again, I think they could have been a little bit better or more streamlined. But I did like how, yes, everything from them did kind of come together in this episode, that you could just kind of see, maybe a little too obviously, but you could see all the pieces from the previous episodes fall into place and form a perfect picture. and it's gotten me very excited now for these final 3 episodes. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you thought of this episode, and how you're feeling about this season overall. Is this the way, or does it still have a ways to go to be as good as the first 2 seasons? Whatever you think, leave those comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.